The millionaire laughed when the maid's son said he spoke 3 languages. He mocked the boy until minutes later the kid translated something that revealed a dangerous secret. And that changed everything. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the Thornton mansion at precisely 7:43 p.m. But it wasn't an accident. It was the exact moment Elena Martinez realized her son was about to change everything. She had begged God that morning, literally begged on her knees in their one-room apartment, hands clasped so tight, her knuckles turned white. Just today, she whispered into the silence. Please, just let me get through today without losing this job. Her babysitter had canceled at 6 a.m. No warning, no apology. Just a text message that made Elena's stomach drop. Sorry, can't make it. Danny was 9 years old enough to understand that his mother worked cleaning other people's houses, old enough to know they couldn't afford to lose another job, old enough to stay quiet in corners and make himself invisible, but not old enough for what was about to happen. You cannot bring him here. Richard Thornton stood in the servants' entrance, blocking the doorway like a wall of expensive cologne and barely contained irritation. His eyes moved from Elena's worn shoes to her son's backpack, calculating something she couldn't name. Elena, we've discussed boundaries. Mr. Thornton, Elena's voice cracked. She hated that sound, the sound of desperation. My sitter canceled and I have nowhere. This is a business dinner. He cut her off without raising his voice. That's what money did. It made you powerful enough not to shout. I have investors flying in from Paris and Tokyo. Do you understand what that means? Danny watched his mother's shoulders curl inward, making her smaller. He'd seen it happen before. Different houses, different men in suits, always the same ending. He'll stay in the corner, Elena whispered. Her hand found Danny's shoulder, squeezing once. Their silent code. Be invisible. You won't even know he's there. Richard Thornton looked at Danny for exactly 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then he stepped aside. One sound, he said. One interruption, and you're both gone. Understood? Elena nodded so hard her neck hurt. The mansion smelled like furniture polish and fresh flowers arranged by people who charged more per hour than Elena made in a day. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high Danny had to tilt his head back to see them. Every surface gleamed. Nothing was out of place, except him. Richard pointed to a cream-colored sofa near the grand staircase, far from the dining room but visible from every angle. There, he said. Don't touch anything. Danny sat. His feet didn't reach the floor. Elena disappeared into the kitchen, her head down, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to exist in spaces that weren't meant for her. Through the doorway, Danny could hear her working. The quiet clink of expensive plates, the soft rustle of cloth napkins being folded into perfect triangles. The investors arrived in stages. First came the laughter from the driveway, then voices in the foyer, speaking languages Danny recognized, but Richard didn't expect him to. French and English, sliding in and out of each other like water. The market analysis looks favorable, one man said in English, his accent sharp around the edges. Bien sûr, but the risk allocation, another replied, switching to French mid-sentence, needs clarification before we proceed. Danny's ears perked up. Not because he was trying to listen, because he couldn't help it. His mother called it a gift. His third-grade teacher called it unusual linguistic development. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman Elena used to work for, called it having an ear for music. Mrs. Chen had been French, married to an American, living in California with a grandson she hadn't seen in 12 years. She'd spent 3 years teaching Danny without meaning to, filling the silence of her big empty house with stories in 3 languages. You remind me of him, she used to say, touching Danny's cheek with papery hands. He would have been your age now. Then she was gone, and Elena lost that job too. Richard Thornton moved through the room like a conductor, orchestrating conversations, pouring wine, laughing at precisely the right moments. He wore confidence like another expensive suit. Danny made himself smaller on the sofa, pulled his knees up, opened a library book about ancient Egypt and pretended to read while the men talked business over appetizers that cost more than his school lunch for a month. The terms are quite clear, one investor said in French, his tone smooth as silk. Absolutely, Richard agreed in English. Crystal clear, but they weren't saying the same thing. Danny's head came up from his book. The French investor had just said something about adjustable terms while speaking English about fixed rates. The words didn't match, not even close. He looked at his mother, visible for a moment in the dining room doorway. She was watching him with wide eyes. "Don't," her expression said. "Please don't." Danny went back to his book, read the same sentence 4 times without understanding a single word. "How delightful," one of the wives said, noticing him for the first time. "Richard, you didn't mention you had a son." The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That's the help's kid," Richard said smoothly. "She had a childcare emergency." The woman's smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes did. "Oh," she said. "How accommodating of you." No one looked at Danny after that. He ceased to exist again, just part of the furniture, less important than the chairs they sat on. Dinner was served. Elena moved between the kitchen and dining room like a ghost, filling water glasses before anyone noticed they were empty, removing plates before anyone finished chewing. Danny watched her hands shake slightly as she set down a platter of something that smelled like herbs and money. The conversation grew louder. Wine made people confident. Deals made them careless. "The liability clause," one investor said in French, leaning back in his chair. "It's quite favorable for us, no?" "Very favorable," another agreed in French. "He won't realize until it's too late." Richard raised his glass. "Gentlemen, I believe we have the foundation for something extraordinary." They toasted in 3 languages, clinked crystal that cost more than Danny's school tuition, smiled with teeth that had been professionally whitened, and Danny felt his heart start to pound, because Richard had just agreed to terms that weren't translated, liability that shifted entirely to him, an exit clause that only existed in French. The whole deal was structured in 2 different ways, depending on which language you understood. His mother appeared at his side, her face tight with warning. "Danny," she whispered, "not a word, not one word." "But Mom, No." She crouched down, her voice desperate. "Baby, I know what you're thinking. Don't. Please don't. He doesn't know what he's agreeing to. It's not our business." Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We don't get to have opinions in houses like this. We just work. We keep our heads down. We survive." Danny looked past her at Richard Thornton, who was signing something now, laughing, completely unaware that he was about to lose everything. "Mom, if you say anything," Elena's voice broke, "if you embarrass me in front of these people, I will lose this job, and it took me 3 months to find this one. 3 months, Danny. Do you understand what that means?" He understood. He understood they were 2 paychecks away from eviction, that his shoes were held together with duct tape, that his mother cried quietly in the bathroom when she thought he was asleep. But he also understood what was happening at that table. "Go to the kitchen," Elena said. "Please, just go wait in the kitchen until this is over." Danny stood, started walking toward the kitchen door, got 3 steps away. Then he heard Richard Thornton say, "Well, gentlemen, I think we're ready to finalize this. My lawyer will review the documents tomorrow, but I see no issues." "Parfait," the French investor said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "No issues at all." Danny stopped walking. His mother's hand grabbed his arm. "Danny, no. They're lying to him," Danny said. Not loud, but not quiet either. The dining room went silent. Richard Thornton turned slowly in his chair. His expression was polite confusion, the kind adults wear when children say something unexpected. "I'm sorry, what?" Elena's face went white. "Mr. Thornton, I apologize. He didn't mean—" "They're saying different things," Danny continued, his voice steadier now. "In English and French. It's not the same deal." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Richard Thornton laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. Not yet. It was the laugh of someone genuinely amused by something absurd. The other men joined in, polite chuckles, bemused smiles. "Well," Richard said, still smiling, "that's quite an imagination you have there, son." "I'm not your son," Danny said quietly, "and I'm not imagining it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard's smile stayed in place, but his eyes went hard. "Elena, please remove your child from the dining area." "Yes, sir, right away. I'm so sorry." Elena grabbed Danny's arm harder. "Wait." One of the investors leaned forward, curiosity replacing amusement. "How do you know what we're saying?" Danny looked at his mother. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing the word no over and over. "I speak 3 languages," Danny said. Portuguese, English, and French. The room exploded with laughter. Real laughter this time. Richard Thornton nearly choked on his wine. 3 languages, he repeated, wiping his eyes. Oh, that's rich. That's absolutely rich. Richard, one of the wives tried. Maybe he... A 9-year-old from... Richard gestured vaguely at Elena, at Danny, at everything they represented. Tells me he speaks 3 languages. What's next? Is he going to critique my wine selection? The investors were laughing now. Not cruelly. Just the way people laugh at something impossible. Like a dog doing calculus. Like a fish riding a bicycle. Elena's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thornton. He watches videos online and he thinks... I don't think, Danny said. His voice cracked. I know, and they're cheating you. The laughter stopped. Richard Thornton stood up, slowly, like a storm gathering itself. Get him out, he said quietly. Now. They said in French that the liability is all yours, Danny said quickly, the words tumbling out. That the exit clause lets them walk away without penalty, but you can't. In English, they told you it's equal. It's not equal. It's a trap. Elena, Richard's voice could have frozen water. Remove your child. The clause de sortie is quite favorable for us, Danny said in perfect French. He won't understand until he signs. The room went dead silent. One of the French investors' faces changed, just for a second. But Danny saw it. Richard saw it too. What did you just say? Richard asked slowly. That's what they said 15 minutes ago. Danny pulled away from his mother's grip. While you were pouring wine, they said in French that the exit clause is quite favorable for them, and you won't understand until you sign. But in English, they told you the terms are crystal clear and completely fair. That's... Richard looked at his investors. That's not... The risk allocation section, Danny continued. His voice was shaking now, but he couldn't stop. In English, they said it's distributed equally. In French, they said he assumes all the risks. Not them. You. Not them. You. One of the investors started to speak. Stopped. Started again in heavily accented English. This is a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Danny said, his voice steady now. I heard every word. I heard every word. You've been running 2 different deals this whole time. One in English for Mr. Thornton. One in French for each other, and they don't match. Richard Thornton sat down slowly. His face had gone completely blank. The expensive kind of blank that came before extremely expensive decisions. Is this true? He asked his investors. Richard, let's discuss this rationally. Is it true? The silence that followed was the loudest thing Danny had ever heard. Elena sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. She was crying now, quiet, helpless tears. Richard picked up the contract, started reading. His jaw tightened with every line. Get out, he said finally, quiet, deadly. Richard, if you'll just... Get out of my house. The investors stood, gathered their papers, walked out without another word. Their wives followed, clutching designer purses, not looking at anyone. The front door closed. Then it was just 3 people in that massive dining room. Elena, Danny, and Richard Thornton, holding a contract that would have bankrupted him. Elena lifted her head. Mr. Thornton, I'll pack my things. Sit down, Richard said. She froze. Please, he added. And it was the please that made her sink back into the chair. Richard looked at Danny. Really looked at him for the first time. How old are you? 9. And you speak 3 languages? Yes, sir. Where did you learn? Danny glanced at his mother. She nodded barely. Mrs. Chen, he said. She used to be Mom's client. She was French and she was lonely and she taught me while Mom worked. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the contract, rubbed his face with both hands, laughed once, but it wasn't a happy sound. I almost lost everything, he said to no one in particular. I almost signed away everything I've built, because I was too arrogant to listen to a 9-year-old. You didn't know, Danny said quietly. I didn't listen. Richard looked at him. There's a difference. Elena was still crying, but silently now. The kind of crying that comes from too many years of too much fear. Richard stood, walked to the window, looked out at his perfect lawn, his perfect cars, his perfect life that had almost fallen apart because he'd assumed perfection meant being right. I need to call my lawyer, he said finally. This whole deal needs to be reviewed, every word, every clause. He turned back to them. Elena, you're not fired. You're getting a raise. And your hours are changing. No more nights, no more weekends. And Danny, he stopped, started again. Danny can come here after school if he needs to. He can do homework in the library. He can eat dinner with us. A pause. If you want. Danny didn't know what to say. Neither did his mother. I heard you, Richard said quietly. Finally, I heard you. And I'm sorry it took almost losing everything for me to listen. He walked to the door. Stopped. The glass I broke earlier, he said. It was my grandfather's whiskey glass. He gave it to me when I made my first million. Told me to remember where I came from. He smiled, sad and small. I guess I forgot. Then he left them there. Elena and Danny, mother and son, still sitting in chairs they weren't supposed to touch, in a house that wasn't theirs, trying to understand what had just happened. Elena pulled Danny into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. She was still crying, but now she was laughing too. The kind of laugh that comes from relief so profound it feels like joy. You scared me to death, she whispered into his hair. Don't ever do that again. Okay. But also, she pulled back to look at him. Also, I'm so proud of you I could burst. Danny smiled, then frowned. Mom, do you think he meant it? About me coming here after school? Elena wiped her eyes, looked around the dining room, at the crystal and the china and the life she'd spent years cleaning but never touching. I don't know, baby, she said honestly, but I think we just found out that speaking up matters, even when you're scared, maybe especially when you're scared. Upstairs, Richard Thornton sat in his office with his head in his hands. The contract sat on his desk, every page a reminder of his own blindness. His phone buzzed, his lawyer calling back, but he didn't answer. Instead, he thought about a 9-year-old boy who saw what he couldn't see, who spoke up when it cost him everything to do it, who was worth listening to despite wearing duct-tape shoes and carrying a second-hand backpack. He thought about Elena, who raised that boy while cleaning other people's toilets, who taught him to be brave even while teaching him to be invisible. And he thought about the glass he'd broken that afternoon, not accidentally. He'd thrown it against the wall in frustration over another business deal that felt wrong. The glass had shattered, just like his assumptions. Maybe it was time to break a few more things, like the rules that said some people mattered and others didn't, like the belief that money meant being right, like the walls between people who served and people who were served. Maybe it was time to listen. The phone buzzed again. This time, Richard answered. Tom, he said to his lawyer, clear your schedule. We need to review every contract I've signed in the past 5 years, and then, he paused. Then I need you to draw up some paperwork for a scholarship fund, for talented kids who need a chance. What brought this on? His lawyer asked. Richard looked at the broken glass still scattered on his office floor, at the contract that would have ruined him, at the view from his window that suddenly looked different. Let's just say, he said quietly, someone reminded me what I'd forgotten. He hung up, went back downstairs, found Elena and Danny still in the dining room looking lost. Have you two eaten? Richard asked. They shook their heads. Then let's fix that, he said. And Danny, while we eat, why don't you tell me about Mrs. Chen? She sounds like someone worth knowing. For the first time in 9 years, Danny Martinez sat at a dining room table that wasn't in his own home and didn't feel like he was trespassing. His mother sat beside him, her back straight for the first time all day. And Richard Thornton sat across from them, learning what it meant to listen to voices he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. The crystal still gleamed. The chandeliers still sparkled. The mansion was still perfect. But something fundamental had shifted. Something that started with breaking glass and ended with breaking down the walls that separated people into categories of worth. It started with a boy who refused to be invisible, and it would change everything. Danny woke up at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of his mother crying in the bathroom. Not the loud kind of crying. The kind she tried to hide behind running water and closed doors. The kind that made his chest hurt because he knew exactly what it meant. She thought they'd lost everything. He pressed his ear against the thin door. Mom? The water shut off. Silence. Then her voice, too bright, too forced. I'm fine, baby. Go back to sleep. It's almost 6. Danny leaned his forehead against the door. And you're not fine. The lock clicked. Elena opened the door, her eyes red but dry now. She'd wiped away the evidence, but Danny had learned to read the things she couldn't hide. The trembling hands. The way she held herself too still, like moving might crack her open. "I had a bad dream," she lied. "About last night." It wasn't a question. Elena sank onto the edge of the bathtub, suddenly looking decades older than her 32 years. "Danny, I need you to understand something. What you did yesterday. I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know I should have stayed quiet. I know I embarrassed you." "Stop." Elena grabbed his shoulders, looking him straight in the eyes. "Don't you dare apologize for being right. Don't you ever apologize for speaking the truth." Danny blinked. "But you said—" "I was scared. I'm still scared." Her voice cracked. "Because men like Richard Thornton, they say things in the moment. Beautiful things. But when the sun comes up and they remember who we are—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "You think he'll fire you today?" Elena stood, turned away, started folding towels that didn't need folding. "I think we need to be prepared for anything. Which means you go to school like normal. You don't tell anyone what happened. And when I come home early today, we start looking for my next job." He said a lot of things, Danny, after almost losing millions of dollars. After being humiliated by a 9-year-old in front of investors. She finally looked at him. People say what they need to say in moments like that. It doesn't mean they mean it when reality sets in. Danny wanted to argue. Wanted to believe that last night had changed something fundamental. But he'd learned early that hope was expensive, and they couldn't afford to buy too much of it. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll go to school." Elena kissed his forehead, holding on a second too long. "I love you, no matter what happens today." "Love you too, Mom." She left for the Thornton mansion at 6:30 a.m., her uniform pressed, her face carefully blank. Danny watched from their apartment window as she walked to the bus stop, her shoulders curved inward against the morning cold, or maybe against what was coming. The Thornton mansion looked different in daylight, less like a palace, more like what it actually was, a statement. Every perfectly trimmed hedge screamed, "I have money." Every gleaming window reflected back the world that didn't belong to people like Elena Martinez. She used her key to enter through the service entrance. The kitchen was empty, usually Mrs. Chen. No, that was the other house, years ago. Usually nobody was here this early except Elena. But today, Richard Thornton sat at the kitchen counter drinking coffee from a mug that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. Elena froze. "Mr. Thornton, I didn't expect— I can come back." "Sit down, Elena." Her heart stopped. This was it. The speech before the firing. The "you're a good worker" but conversation that always ended the same way. "Sir, if this is about last night, sit down." Not angry, just firm. Elena sat, her hands folded tight in her lap, bracing for impact. Richard set down his coffee. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "I called my lawyer at midnight," he said. "Woke him up. Made him review every document those investors sent me." Elena said nothing. What could she say? Danny was right about everything. Every single word. Richard laughed, but it sounded broken. The liability clause, the exit terms, the risk allocation, it was all structured to bankrupt me if anything went wrong. And they buried it in French, knowing I'd never catch it because I was too arrogant to hire a proper translator. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "Why are you apologizing? Your son saved me from the biggest mistake of my career." He stood, paced to the window. "Do you know what I did after you left last night?" Elena shook her head. "I sat in my office and looked at every business deal I've made in the last 5 years. Every contract. Every negotiation. And you know what I realized?" He turned to face her. "I've been making decisions based on confidence instead of competence. On image instead of information. I've been so sure I was the smartest person in every room that I stopped actually listening to anyone. Mr. Thornton, a 9-year-old had to save me from myself." He laughed again, that same broken sound. "A 9-year-old who sits in corners trying to be invisible, while I parade around thinking I'm invincible." The silence stretched. Elena didn't dare break it. "I meant what I said last night," Richard said finally. "About the raise. About the hours. About Danny being welcome here." He paused. "But I need to know if you trust that. Because if you don't, If you think I'm just saying words because I feel guilty, then we need to have a different conversation. Elena looked up at him. Really looked. She'd cleaned this man's house for 6 months, but this was the first time she'd ever actually seen him as a person, instead of just an employer. A person who made mistakes, who felt embarrassed, who was trying, in his own clumsy way, to do something right. I'm scared, she admitted. We've been here before. Different houses, different promises. They always end the same way. I know. Richard sat back down. And I can't prove I'm different with words. I can only prove it with time, with action, with... He stopped, started again. My grandfather cleaned floors at a factory for 30 years. He saved every penny so my father could go to college. My father built a small business so I could have opportunities he never had. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that my success was built on the backs of people who cleaned floors. Elena felt tears threatening. She pushed them down. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that I understand, that I see the risk you're taking by trusting me, that I won't waste it. He slid a folder across the counter. New contract, guaranteed hours, health benefits, a salary that reflects what you're actually worth, not what the market says I can get away with paying you. Elena's hands shook as she opened the folder. The numbers on the page didn't make sense. They were too high. Almost double what she was making now. I can't. This is too much. It's not enough, Richard interrupted. But it's a start. And if you stay, if you give me a chance to prove this is real, then we'll revisit it in 6 months, along with something else. He pulled out another paper. A college fund. For Danny. Full ride to any school that accepts him, when the time comes. Elena couldn't stop the tears now. They came hot and fast, years of fear and exhaustion pouring out. Why? Because your son saw the truth when everyone else, including me, refused to look. Because he spoke up when it cost him everything to do it. Because talent and intelligence don't care about zip codes or bank accounts. Richard's voice softened. And because maybe if I do this right, I can remember who I'm supposed to be. Elena wiped her eyes, looked at the contract. At the man who'd spent months being just an employer and was now trying to become something more complicated. Something like decent. What about Danny? She asked. You really meant it. About him coming here after school. I'd like him to, if he wants to. Richard hesitated. I need to apologize to him. Properly. For laughing. For dismissing him. For making him feel like he didn't matter. He's 9. He'll forgive you. That doesn't mean I don't owe him the apology. Elena closed the folder, held it against her chest like a shield. Or maybe a promise. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we'll try. But if anything changes, if this turns out to be just guilt or charity, I need you to tell me. Don't let us build hope on something that isn't real. I promise. Richard extended his hand. Elena shook it. His grip was firm, but not crushing. Equal, like they were two people making an agreement, not an employer bestowing mercy. Thank you, she whispered. Thank your son, Richard replied. He's the one who started all this. 3 blocks away, Danny Martinez sat in his 3rd grade classroom, staring at a math worksheet he couldn't focus on. He kept thinking about his mother, about the look on her face this morning, about the way she'd said, when I come home early, instead of if. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, stopped beside his desk. Danny, everything okay? He nodded automatically. Yes, ma'am. You haven't written anything in 20 minutes. Because his mother was probably getting fired right now. Because they'd probably have to move again. Because he'd tried to do the right thing, and it was going to cost them everything. But he couldn't say that. So he picked up his pencil and wrote 7/8/56. Ms. Rodriguez squeezed his shoulder once, gentle, then moved on. She knew. Teachers always knew. But knowing didn't fix anything. The morning dragged. Lunch came and went. Danny ate alone, like always, trying not to think about his mother sitting on their worn couch, circling job ads in the newspaper. At 2:15 p.m., the classroom phone rang. Ms. Rodriguez answered, listened, then looked at Danny with an expression he couldn't read. Danny, you need to gather your things. Someone's here to pick you up. His stomach dropped. Early pickup meant emergency. Emergency meant everything had fallen apart. He packed his backpack with shaking hands. walked to the office like he was walking to his own funeral. But it wasn't his mother waiting in the office. It was Richard Thornton, wearing jeans and a regular shirt, looking completely out of place among the plastic chairs and children's artwork. He stood when Danny entered, his hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. "Hi, Danny," he said. And then, before anyone else could speak, "I owe you an apology." Danny stared. The office secretary stared. Ms. Rodriguez, who'd followed him down, stared. "I laughed at you," Richard continued. "I dismissed you. I made you feel small and unimportant. And I was wrong. Completely. Thoroughly wrong. You were the only person in that room brave enough to speak the truth, and I'm sorry I didn't listen the first time you tried to tell me." Danny felt his throat close up. "It's okay. It's not okay. But I'm going to do better." Richard crouched down to Danny's eye level. "Your mom said yes, to all of it. The new contract, the hours, the college fund. And I'm here to ask if you'd be willing to give me a second chance. Come to the house after school. Do homework. Have dinner with us. Let me prove that last night meant something." Danny looked at Ms. Rodriguez. She nodded slightly, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Where's my mom?" Danny asked. "At the house, waiting for you." Richard smiled, small and uncertain. "She wanted to be here, but we figured you might prefer a familiar face for the drive home. You're driving me? If that's okay with you." Danny thought about the bus ride, about going home to their empty apartment, about his mother's tears this morning. Then he thought about last night, about speaking up even when he was terrified, about the way Richard had looked at him after the investors left, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. "Okay," Danny said. "Let's go." Richard stood, relief clear on his face. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As they walked out to the parking lot, to a car that cost more than 5 years of his mother's old salary, Danny realized something. Last night had broken glass, but today was about building something new from the pieces, something that might actually last. The car ride was silent for the first 3 minutes. Danny sat in the back seat of Richard's Mercedes, watching the city blur past the window. The leather smelled new. Everything in this car probably cost more than his mom made in a year. "You can sit up front if you want," Richard said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I'm okay back here." Another minute of silence. Then Richard cleared his throat. "Your teacher seems nice, Ms. Rodriguez." "She is. She looked surprised when I showed up." Everyone was surprised. Danny finally looked at Richard's reflection in the mirror. "Rich people don't usually pick up kids from my school." Richard winced. "I suppose they don't. It's okay. I'm used to being the different one. That shouldn't be something you're used to." Richard pulled up to a red light, turned slightly in his seat. "Danny, I need you to understand something. What I'm trying to do here, with the contract, the college fund, bringing you to the house, it's not charity." "What is it then?" "It's me trying to be less of an idiot." The light turned green. Richard drove. "My whole life I've surrounded myself with people who tell me I'm smart, who agree with everything I say, who laugh at my jokes even when they're not funny. And somewhere along the way, I started believing I actually was the smartest person in every room." Danny said nothing, just listened. Then a 9-year-old proved me wrong in front of everyone. Richard's voice caught. "And instead of being grateful, my first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss you, to protect my ego instead of protecting my business. You didn't know I really spoke French. I didn't care enough to find out." Richard pulled into his driveway, killed the engine, turned to face Danny fully. "That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not that I didn't believe you, that I didn't even consider you might be telling the truth." Danny unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. "My mom says rich people don't see us. They see through us, like we're glass. Your mom is right." Richard opened his door. "And I'm trying to break that glass, if you'll let me." They walked into the house together. Elena was in the kitchen, and the relief on her face when she saw Danny made his chest tight. "Baby." She pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "You okay?" Mr. Thornton apologized, in front of everyone at school. Elena looked at Richard over Danny's head. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. "He told me," Elena said. "Come on, I made your favorite." Danny stopped. "You cooked here?" Mr. Thornton said I could use the kitchen. "Said this is our home now, too, if we want it to be." The words hung in the air. Home. They'd lived in 8 different apartments in Danny's 9 years. None of them had ever felt like home. They were just places they stayed until the rent went up or the landlord decided he didn't like the look of them. Not the whole house, Richard added quickly. I'm not saying move in. I mean, he stopped, started over. What I mean is, you're welcome here. Both of you. Not as employee and employer, as, he struggled for the word. People, Danny offered. Yes, as people. Dinner was awkward at first. They sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room where the disaster had happened last night. Elena had made arroz con pollo, and the smell filled the house with something that felt almost like warmth. This is incredible, Richard said after the first bite. I've been eating restaurant food for so long I forgot what real cooking tastes like. Elena smiled, small but genuine. My grandmother's recipe. Tell me about her. And Elena did. Slowly at first, then with more confidence. She talked about growing up in a tiny house in São Paulo, about her grandmother who raised 6 kids while working 3 jobs, about coming to America with nothing but hope and a suitcase. Danny watched his mother transform, saw her shoulders straighten, heard her voice grow stronger. This was the mom he saw at home, not the invisible woman she became in other people's houses. Richard listened like he was hearing the most important story ever told, asked questions, laughed at the funny parts, looked genuinely sad at the hard parts. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman, he said. She would have liked you, Elena replied, then caught herself. I mean, she would have seen right through me, Richard finished. Would have called me out on my nonsense. Probably, Elena smiled. She didn't believe in wasting words on politeness when truth was more important. Danny comes by it honestly then. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Richard set down his fork. I have a proposition, and I want you both to think about it honestly before answering. Danny felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes. The catch. There was always a catch. I need help, Richard said simply. Real help. I'm restructuring my entire business. Every contract, every deal, every partnership. And I realize something. I can't do it alone. I don't trust my judgment anymore. What kind of help? Elena asked carefully. Danny. Richard looked at him directly. I need someone who sees what others miss, who isn't afraid to speak up, who understands that words matter, especially when they're in different languages. I'm 9, Danny said. I know, which is why I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you an education. Richard pulled out a folder. There's a program at the university for gifted kids. Language immersion, cultural studies, translation theory. It's designed for high schoolers, but I called in a favor. They'll test you. If you qualify, you'd attend twice a week. After school. Danny's heart raced. That sounds expensive. That's not your concern. Your concern is whether you want to do it. Why? Danny asked. Why do all this? Richard was quiet for a long moment. Because I have a daughter, he said finally. Had. She died 3 years ago. Car accident. She was 16. The kitchen went silent. Her name was Sophie. Richard's voice cracked. She wanted to be a translator for the UN. Spoke 4 languages. Could have spoken 10 if she'd had the time. He wiped his eyes roughly. After she died, I threw myself into work. Stopped seeing people as people. Just saw deals and numbers and ways to make more money. Elena reached across the table, squeezed his hand once. Then you showed up, Richard continued, looking at Danny. Speaking 3 languages, seeing things I couldn't see. And for a moment, I saw Sophie. Not as a replacement, you're not her, but as a reminder of what matters, of who matters. Danny felt tears on his cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. I'll try, he said. If the test says I'm good enough, I'll try. You're already good enough, Richard said firmly. The test just proves it to everyone else. They finished dinner with lighter conversation. Richard asked about Danny's favorite subjects, history and reading, his least favorite, gym, what he wanted to be when he grew up. He didn't know yet, and that was okay. After they ate, Richard showed Danny the library, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books, a reading corner with a window seat, a desk with good lighting. This is yours now, if you want it. Do homework here. Read whatever interests you. I'll stay out of your way. Danny ran his hand along the spines. More books than he'd ever seen outside a library. Can I really? It's just collecting dust otherwise. Sophie used to spend hours in here. Richard smiled, sad but real. I think she'd like knowing someone was using it again. That night, as Richard drove them back to their apartment, Danny asked the question that had been burning in his mind. What happened to the investors? The ones from last night? Richard's jaw tightened. I filed a complaint with the International Business Bureau. They're being investigated for fraud. Won't be able to operate in the US for a long time. Good, Danny said quietly. Your bravery did that. Your willingness to speak up even when everyone told you not to. Richard pulled up to their building. Don't ever lose that, okay? Don't let the world teach you to be smaller than you are. Elena and Danny walked up the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment. The building smelled like old cooking and mildew. Their door stuck the way it always did. Inside, their furniture was worn and mismatched. But something had changed. Mom? Danny asked as she tucked him into bed. Do you think this is real? Elena sat on the edge of his mattress. I think Richard is trying. I think he's hurting and lost, and trying to do something good with his grief. She brushed hair from Danny's forehead. But we'll be careful, okay? We'll protect our hearts while we see if his intentions match his actions. I like him, Danny admitted, even though I'm scared too. Me too, baby. Me too. After Elena left, Danny lay in the dark, thinking about Sophie, who never got to be a UN translator, about his mom, who spent years being invisible, about Richard, who had everything except the thing that mattered most, about how one dinner party had cracked open 3 lives and let the light in. He thought about the library, about the books waiting for him, about the program at the university, about possibilities that hadn't existed 48 hours ago. And he thought about what Richard had said. Don't let the world teach you to be smaller than you are. Danny Martinez had spent 9 years making himself invisible, shrinking to fit into corners of other people's houses, learning to take up less space. Maybe it was time to learn something different. Maybe it was time to stop disappearing. 3 miles away, Richard Thornton sat in Sophie's room for the first time in 6 months. Her medals from language competitions still hung on the wall. Her books lined the shelves in alphabetical order because she'd been meticulous like that. I met a kid today, he said to the empty room. He reminds me of you, smart, brave, sees the world in more colors than most people. The room didn't answer. It never did. I'm going to help him, Soph. The way I should have helped more people when you were alive. The way you always wanted me to. Richard's voice broke. I can't bring you back, but maybe I can make sure another kid with your gift doesn't get overlooked. Maybe that's something.
He sat there until midnight, talking to his daughter who would never answer, making promises to a boy he barely knew, trying to figure out how to be a person worth listening to. Outside, the city slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the test at the university, more conversations, more chances to get it right or wrong.
But tonight, 3 people lay in their separate beds, each carrying a small flame of hope they were afraid to examine too closely. Because hope was dangerous when you'd spent your whole life learning to live without it. But maybe, just maybe, this time, it was worth the risk. The university testing center smelled like old paper and nervous energy. Danny sat in a chair too big for him, surrounded by teenagers who looked twice his age. They stared at him, some curious, most dismissive. A 9-year-old didn't belong here. He almost got up and left. Danny Martinez. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair appeared in the doorway. I'm Dr. Chen. Yes, like your Mrs. Chen. Different family, but I knew her. She talked about you. Danny's throat went tight. She did? She called you her accidental grandson. Said you had a gift. Dr. Chen smiled. Let's see if she was right. The test room was small. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a recording device. Dr. Chen sat across from him, her hands folded calmly. I'm going to speak to you in 3 languages: Portuguese, English, and French. Sometimes I'll switch mid-sentence. I want you to respond in whatever language feels natural. Don't think about it. Just let it flow. Understand? Danny nodded. Good. Let's begin. Dr. Chen switched to Portuguese without warning. Tell me why you're here today. Danny answered in Portuguese, explaining about the dinner party, about the investors, about Richard wanting to help him learn. Dr. Chen switched to French mid-conversation. And you caught the discrepancy purely by listening? Danny followed into French automatically. I didn't mean to. The words just didn't match. Back to English. Most adults miss those nuances. How did a 9-year-old catch them? Because nobody expects me to understand, Danny replied. So they don't hide what they're saying. They just say it. Dr. Chen's expression shifted. Invisibility as advantage. Something like that. For the next hour, Dr. Chen threw everything at him. Rapid switches between languages. Technical terms. Idiomatic expressions that didn't translate directly. Cultural contexts that required understanding beyond vocabulary. Danny kept up. Sometimes he stumbled, but he recovered. Let the sounds guide him instead of overthinking the grammar. When it ended, Dr. Chen sat back and studied him. Mrs. Chen was right about you, but she undersold it. She made notes on her tablet. You don't just speak 3 languages. You think in them. That's extraordinarily rare, especially for someone your age. Is that good? It's remarkable. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Danny, I'm recommending you for immediate acceptance into the program, but I need to be honest with you about what that means. Danny's stomach flipped. Okay, this won't be easy. You'll be the youngest student by 6 years. The work will be challenging. Some of the other students will resent you for being here. Some will doubt you belong. She paused. Can you handle that? Danny thought about sitting in corners of mansions, about being laughed at by adults in expensive suits, about his mother's tears in the bathroom. I've been handling it my whole life, he said quietly. Then welcome to the program. Dr. Chen extended her hand. Classes start next Tuesday. Don't be late. Richard was pacing in the hallway when Danny emerged. Well, I got in. Richard's face split into a grin so wide it looked painful. Of course you did. Of course you... He stopped himself, took a breath. How do you feel? Scared, Danny admitted. Good. If you weren't scared, you wouldn't be paying attention. Richard crouched down. Listen to me. Some of those kids are going to make this hard for you. They're going to question whether you deserve to be there. Are you ready for that? Are you asking if I'm going to quit? I'm asking if you know you're worth enough to stay. Danny met his eyes. Mrs. Chen used to say that courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Danny shouldered his backpack. Can we go tell my mom? They found Elena at the mansion, reorganizing the kitchen pantry. When she saw their faces, she dropped the can of beans she was holding. He got in, Richard said simply. Elena covered her mouth with both hands. Tears spilled over immediately. Baby, I start Tuesday. Danny ran to her, and she pulled him into a hug so fierce he could barely breathe. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into his hair. So proud. I'm scared, Mom. Being scared means it matters. Means you care. She pulled back to look at him. And you're going to be amazing. That evening, Richard ordered pizza instead of cooking. They ate in the library, surrounded by Sophie's books, and Danny finally asked the question that had been burning since yesterday. What was she like? Sophie? Richard went still. Eleanor tensed, ready to redirect if needed, but Richard took a breath and answered. Stubborn. Brilliant. She argued with me about everything. His voice was rough but steady. She wanted to change the world through words. Believed that most conflicts came from misunderstanding, and if people could just truly hear each other, the world would be better, Danny finished. Exactly. Richard smiled. Sad but genuine. She would have loved meeting you. Would have grilled you on grammar rules and challenged you to translation competitions. Who would have won? Her. Always her. Richard laughed, and this time it sounded almost real. But she would have respected that you pushed her to work for it. They sat in comfortable silence, eating pizza and passing around a 2-liter of soda like they were just a normal family having a normal evening. Except they weren't normal. They were 3 broken people trying to figure out how to fit their jagged edges together without cutting each other. Can I ask you something? Danny said suddenly. Why did you really come to my school yesterday? Richard set down his pizza. Because I needed you to know I meant it. Words are easy. Showing up is harder. He met Danny's eyes. And because I was terrified you'd say no, that you'd decide I wasn't worth the risk. I almost did. What changed your mind? Danny thought about it. You apologized in front of everyone. Rich people don't do that. They make excuses or blame other people or just pretend it didn't happen. He paused. You didn't pretend. I couldn't. Not after what you did for me. I just told the truth. No, Richard said firmly. You risked everything to tell the truth. There's a difference. Later, as Richard drove them home, Danny watched the city lights blur past. His city. The same streets he'd walked his whole life, but somehow they looked different now. Richard, he said quietly, what happens if I fail? At the program? Then, you'll have tried something difficult and learned from it. But what if I embarrass you? Richard pulled over, turned to face Danny fully. Listen to me very carefully. You could walk into that program, say nothing but curse words in all 3 languages, and set the building on fire, and I would still be proud of you for trying. Danny laughed despite himself. That's a low bar. My point is, you don't owe me success. You don't owe me perfection. You owe yourself the chance to see what you're capable of. Richard's voice cracked slightly. I lost that chance with Sophie. I was always pushing her to be better, to achieve more. And then she was gone, and I never got to tell her that she was already enough. I think she knew. Maybe, but I should have said it more. Richard pulled back onto the road. So I'm saying it to you now. You're already enough, Danny. Everything else is just extra. When they reached the apartment, Elena walked Danny upstairs while Richard waited in the car. At their door, she knelt down to his level. This program, the mansion, Richard, it's all moving so fast. Are you okay with that? Danny considered. I think so. It's weird, but good weird. If it ever stops feeling good, you tell me immediately. We walk away, no matter what. She gripped his shoulders. You understand? Nothing is worth losing yourself over. I understand, Mom. Good. She kissed his forehead. Now get inside and do your homework. Some things stay normal even when everything else is changing. Danny went inside, but before starting homework, he pulled out the library book about ancient Egypt he'd been reading the night of the dinner party. He'd barely gotten through 3 pages that night, too distracted by the conversations happening around him. Now he could barely remember why he'd been so interested in pyramids. The world had gotten bigger, and scary, and full of possibility. He thought about Tuesday, about walking into a room full of teenagers who would see him as a child, about proving himself over and over, about carrying the weight of Richard's grief and his mother's hopes and Mrs. Chen's memory. It was a lot for 9-year-old shoulders. But then he remembered Richard's words. You don't owe me perfection. And his mother's. Nothing is worth losing yourself over. And Dr. Chen's advice from the program. Invisibility as an advantage. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect. Maybe he just needed to be present, to show up, to speak up when it mattered and stay silent when it didn't. To be Danny Martinez, who spoke 3 languages and saw what others missed and refused to stay invisible anymore. He opened his homework folder and started on his math problems. Simple multiplication. Easy compared to everything else in his life right now. Sometimes simple was exactly what you needed. Outside, Richard sat in his car, staring at the rundown building where Elena and Danny lived. 3 flights of stairs, peeling paint, broken intercom. They deserved better, but rushing them into his house would be wrong, would turn this into something it wasn't supposed to be. This wasn't about rescue. It was about respect, about partnership, about 3 people learning to trust each other slowly, carefully, one dinner at a time. He pulled out his phone and texted his lawyer. Start the college fund paperwork. Full ride, any school, no strings. Then he drove home to his empty mansion and sat in Sophie's room and told her about Danny's test, about the pizza dinner, about how maybe, just maybe, he was starting to figure out how to be the person she always believed he could be. The room didn't answer. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel quite so empty. Tuesday came faster than Danny expected. He stood outside the university building, backpack heavy on his shoulders, watching college students rush past. None of them looked at him. Why would they? He was just a kid. You ready? Richard asked beside him. No. Good answer. Richard squeezed his shoulder once. Go show them what Mrs. Chen already knew. Danny walked in alone. Richard had offered to come, but this was something he needed to do himself. The classroom held 12 students, all teenagers, all staring when he entered. You're in the wrong room, kid, a tall boy with perfect hair said. Elementary school is across campus. Dr. Chen appeared before Danny could respond. He's exactly where he belongs, Marcus. Danny, Take the seat up front. The first class was brutal. Technical grammar, complex verb conjugations, cultural contexts Danny had never encountered. He struggled, made mistakes, felt his face burn when Marcus laughed at his pronunciation of a French liaison. But he didn't quit. At lunch, he sat alone in the hallway, eating the sandwich his mom packed. 2 girls from class walked past, whispering. He caught the words, charity case, and doesn't belong. Danny finished his sandwich and went back inside. The second class was better. Dr. Chen asked them to translate a business contract from English to French. Most students focused on word-for-word accuracy. Danny raised his hand. The literal translation is correct, but the meaning changes. In French, this clause sounds optional. In English, it's mandatory. The room went quiet. Explain, Dr. Chen said. Danny did, showing how subtle word choices shifted legal responsibility. How translation wasn't just about vocabulary. It was about understanding what people actually meant. When he finished, Dr. Chen smiled. That's exactly right. That's why we study this. Words have power, especially when they cross languages. Marcus didn't laugh anymore. 3 weeks in, Danny came home to find his mother crying at their kitchen table. But this time, she was smiling too. Baby, look. She showed him a letter, official university letterhead. They want to offer me a position in their facilities department. Better pay. Benefits. Real benefits, Danny. Health insurance. Retirement. What about Richard? He recommended me. Told them I was the hardest worker he'd ever met. Elena wiped her eyes. He's letting me go, Danny. Not firing. Releasing. So I can build something that's mine. Danny hugged her tight. You deserve it, Mom. We both do. That evening, Richard took them to dinner. Not at the mansion. At a small restaurant downtown, where the tables wobbled and the food was perfect. I'm proud of you, Richard told Elena. Both of you? You're not sad we're leaving? Danny asked. Sad? No. Grateful. Richard set down his fork. You taught me something important. That helping people doesn't mean keeping them. It means giving them what they need to fly. That's really cheesy, Danny said. Richard laughed. Sophie used to tell me the same thing. I'm embracing it. What about you? Elena asked. What happens now? I'm restructuring the company, hiring people who will challenge me, and I'm starting a foundation in Sophie's name for kids like Danny, gifted students who need opportunities but can't afford them. The Sophie Thornton Foundation, Elena said softly. She would have liked that. Richard's voice caught. She would have liked both of you. On Danny's last day at the mansion library, he found a gift on the desk. A leather journal with his name embossed on the cover. Inside, Richard had written, For Danny, may you always speak up, even when your voice shakes. May you see what others miss. May you never forget that being small doesn't mean being powerless. You changed my life by refusing to stay invisible. Thank you. Richard. Underneath, in different handwriting, Elena had added, Baby, you taught me that courage isn't about never being scared. It's about being scared and speaking anyway. I love you more than words in any language can say. Mom. Danny traced the letters with his finger, closed the book, held it against his chest. 4 months after the dinner party, Danny stood in front of his class at the university. Final presentation. He had to translate a speech from English to French and Portuguese, explaining cultural nuances in each. His hands shook. Marcus sat in the back row, arms crossed. The other students watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to doubt. Danny took a breath, began speaking. He moved between languages like water, smooth and natural. Explained how the same message shifted meaning across cultures. How translation was about understanding hearts, not just words. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Dr. Chen started clapping. Slowly, the other students joined. Even Marcus nodded, grudgingly impressed. That, Dr. Chen said, is what we're here to learn. Danny just taught you more in 10 minutes than I could in 10 weeks. After class, Marcus approached him. You're actually pretty good at this. Thanks, Danny said carefully. Sorry I was a jerk at the start. Marcus shrugged. You're 9. It didn't seem fair that you were better than me. I'm not better. I'm just different. Yeah, maybe. Marcus extended his hand. See you next semester? Danny shook it. See you next semester. That night, Elena tucked Danny into bed in their new apartment. 2 bedrooms. Working heat. A kitchen where everything actually worked. "Mom?" Danny asked. "Do you think Mrs. Chen would be proud? Baby, she's watching from wherever wise old ladies go when they die, and she's bragging to everyone about you." Elena kissed his forehead. "I know I am. I was so scared that night, at the dinner party." "I know. But I spoke up anyway. And you changed everything." Elena smiled. "Not just for us. For Richard, too. For every kid who'll get a scholarship from Sophie's foundation. You started ripples, Danny. They're still spreading." After she left, Danny pulled out the leather journal, opened to the first blank page, wrote, "My name is Danny Martinez. I'm 9 years old. I speak 3 languages. I used to make myself invisible. Then one night, I decided to be seen. This is what happened." He'd fill the rest of the pages with his story. All of it. The fear and the courage. The failures and the victories. The moments when he wanted to quit but chose to stay. Because maybe someone else needed to know that being small didn't mean being powerless. That speaking up mattered, even when your voice shook. That one dinner party could crack open the world and let the light in. Miles away, Richard Thornton sat in Sophie's room. But tonight, he'd moved some of her things to make space for new memories. Photos of Danny at his first university class. A copy of the foundation paperwork. A thank you card from Elena. "I'm doing it, Soph," he said to the quiet. "I'm trying, not perfectly, but honestly." The room didn't answer, but the silence felt warm now, full of possibility instead of grief. He thought about Danny, about Elena, about the investors he'd almost let destroy him, about how one boy's courage had taught him to listen, how speaking up had changed 3 lives. Richard picked up his phone, started drafting the announcement for the foundation's first scholarship class. 20 kids, 20 chances, 20 voices that deserved to be heard. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. And sometimes that's all courage requires. Not perfection, just starting. Danny Martinez fell asleep with the journal on his chest, dreaming of languages he hadn't learned yet, of students he'd meet, of ripples spreading wider than he could imagine. He'd spent 9 years learning to be invisible. One night taught him to be seen, and everything changed. Not because he was special, because he was brave. Because he spoke up when silence would have been easier. Because he refused to let fear win. The millionaire had laughed, but the boy spoke anyway, and that made all the difference.